Hi, I'm Bergen Streetman, Director of Marketing at Trinity University Press. Thanks for joining us here tonight for the Maverick Book Club. The books we discuss in this monthly series explore the rich stories of Texas, but in this first season, we are focused mainly on our hometown, San Antonio. Be it a provocative look at life here during World War II or a discussion about writing Black history, our series aims to be as diverse as the city itself. So enjoy yourself, ask questions. At the end, don't forget to check out the book we'll be reading and talking about next month, 300 Years of San Antonio in Bexar County, which is available to you at a special price just for signing up. In the meantime, I'm going to hand this off to our dear friend, Ed Conroy, Development Director for the Southwest School of Art, who will be leading our discussion tonight on Greetings from San Antonio. Thanks again for joining us, and see you next time. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you, Bergen, and good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here tonight as the guest of Trinity University Press and the Maverick Book Club to interview my dear friend, Louis Fisher, who has written so many extraordinary books about the history of the city that I've had the pleasure of reading and reviewing in the San Antonio Express News for many years. And he has not failed to live up to his talents again with his latest book, Greetings from San Antonio, which is all about historic postcards from his own extraordinary collection. So I do have a duty to say something else, which is that you can purchase Greetings from San Antonio at a 20% off discount using the link and code in the chat feature. So, Louis, good evening. Thank you for being here. There we go. She just unmuted you, Louis. So.
Oh, good. Well, it's nice to be unmuted. Although.
Yeah. Welcome to the world of Zoom, the new world that dominates our lives these days. Yeah. But yeah, it was just a real pleasure to open your book and look through all of the extraordinary features. First, let me give everyone a little bit of background about Louis. Louis, as I understand it, once told me that he fell in love both with San Antonio and his wife, Mary, when he came to San Antonio during World War II and had the pleasure of eating enchiladas on the Riverwalk. And
not quite World War II, a little later than that.
Well, you look awfully good. See, I embellish there. But anyhow, yeah, and you went on to become publisher, editor of the North San Antonio Times, and then later did the wonderful job of morphing from journalist to historian in all of your many books. American Venice is one of my favorites. Saving San Antonio, which tells the history of the Conservation Society, is great. And they rewarded you for that job by naming you a Texas Preservation Hero, which indeed you are. And now Trinity University Press has bought Maverick, and you are able to pursue other things. So first of all, I should ask, will you please tell us the story of how you got the inspiration to write this book?
Well, I wish I could claim the credit for it, but one of the great advantages of joining Trinity University Press is you have their brain power. And actually, it was Tom Payton, the director of the press, who came up with the idea based on the postcards that he knew that I had.
Okay, very good. And tell us a little bit about how you acquired these postcards, your extraordinary collection of 600 or more postcards.
Well, there are about 635 in this book. Actually, that's maybe 10-20% of my actual collection, which began about 20 years ago. I bought a collection of somebody else's, a lot of stuff, and that included a lot of postcards. And I realized as I was just getting into the book publishing business that these things made pretty good illustrations. In fact, they made very good illustrations. There are some advantages of postcards. For one thing, they are most of them professionally taken by a professional photographer. They're cropped. They're of a subject that is interesting. And so they really can focus on, in the case of San Antonio, landmarks and other elements of the city that were created to be sold, and so therefore are well done, are interesting, popular, and a lot less expensive than going and getting the permission to use them from some institution.
Yes, and what I find interesting, fascinating about your book is the way in which you have put them all into wonderful juxtapositions and commented on them, putting them in context. That must have been a very interesting job, like arranging them all, putting them all together. Tremendous amount of work in that organization, I'm sure.
Well, it was a challenge. You take a few thousand postcards and you want to winnow it down and tell the story of a city. That does present some challenges. There are postcard books, and then there are postcard books. The traditional type of postcard book will have postcards of the same size, say two to a page, 4 to a page, and will be arranged by topic, hotels, churches, or whatever, and be a little bit difficult to comprehend. But in this case, Trinity Press deserves a lot of credit for getting a designer. Before I even started work, they had a designer come up with about a half dozen different templates for the pages. So that some pages will have 4 postcards on them, others will have just 3, one large one, and 1 or 2 or 3 smaller ones, and some major postcards just will be featured on a single page. So you don't get the sense of not quite boredom, but just the sense of sameness that you get so often when you go through a book. The next thing I had to do was to determine how to tell the story. And if you look at the, rather than take the traditional categories of putting all the schools on in one section and the churches on another and the hotels on a third, I take it from the viewpoint of someone who is coming to San Antonio. So the first section is arriving and settling in. That way you can put the railroads and the hotels and everything and the buses and cars in the same section and tell a story in the process.
Yes.
Once you're in town, then the next chapter is seeing the sights. That includes the Alamo and all the tourist sites, and then living in the city, which is how you know, where your homes are, where you eat, where you go to the theater, and then it just kind of follows life in that regard.
Yeah, it's a beautiful organization, and it made me wistful in a way for our public life that we had before we were all here at home. You know, it
Right.
made me want to go out and see these places that I hadn't been to in a long time. So, and by the way, I'm new to doing this, so I want to remind everyone, or just let them know, that we love questions. And if you would like to write questions, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Write them in, and I'll try to get some of them into the dialogue, and we'll also have time at the end for some Q&A as well. So very good. So yes, I like the order in which you've organized it. After living in San Antonio, there's out on the town, then there's churches, schools, and colleges, and then there's Military City, USA. How could we have that without Fort Sam and the various other things? So what we'll do is begin to take a saunter through historic San Antonio, and Bergen is going to help us by showing some of the cards that are in there, and we will we'll discuss them and perhaps a few others as we go through each of the 7 sections of the book. So great. Here is one that's right at the very beginning of the introduction. Business is picking up, and it obviously has room for a message on the front. Please tell us a little bit about this card, Louis.
Well, there are all kinds of postcards, and there are collectors who specialize in all kinds of postcards. This is a comic card. Postcards, picture postcards, really got started at the turn of the century with the development of color lithography, printing in Germany. It was just at the time when people were communicating cheaply by postcards. Cost you a penny to send a card. There weren't many other pictures of the city, no ways to really tell what the city liked except through postcards. And so these tended to tell what the city looked like as you would like others to see it. The comic postcards like this one, you can see have a double meaning and add a sort of a light touch.
Right. All right, Bergen, let's move to the next one in the series. It's the
This
Happy
is
New
another
Year.
card
There you
that
go.
people specialize in collecting New Year's cards. There are St. Patrick's Day cards and Halloween cards and all sorts of other things. In this particular book, we stay away basically from that sort of card, except to illustrate those that had to do with San Antonio, as this one did. A lot of local residents, members of a club or something, put out.
Yeah, and there's some distinguished family names there, such as Elmendorf, as in Elmendorf Lake, and Stumberg. Louis Stumberg was very well known. So yeah, it's a cute card. All right, let's move on then with your magical help there behind the scenes, Bergen, to the next section, which is arriving in San Antonio. And there we have one of our famous old trolleys that used to go all around downtown. Tell us a little bit about this one, Louis.
Well, this is just a sample of a means of transportation to get around in San Antonio once you get here. This particular streetcar you see in the front has gone to Army Post. San Antonio being a military city, you had a lot of soldiers, obviously, at Fort St. Houston in this case. And I might mention that soldiers were a great market for postcards either. We had tens of thousands of soldiers going through San Antonio, and they all would send home postcards. So there's a great profusion of postcards as a result of that.
Yeah, there's a question here from Bill Mall, which is, were all of the cards created by San Antonio companies, or were they from some other sources as well?
Well, that's a good question, Bill. They were from all over. Many of them were San Antonio companies, but others, there was a company that developed later called Kurt Teich, T-E-I-C-H, which was based in Chicago. Their archive is now in the Newberry Library in Chicago, and there are about 500,000 cards that they did of cities throughout the country. And I think they even saved the negatives they used for postcard-based cards. But they were a major manufacturer of postcards.
Very good. All right. Let's move to the next card that's in that sequence there. And oh wow! And this is such an extraordinary rendering of the old hotel at Hot Wells. Tell us a little bit about this one.
This is a card that has a great breadth because it was a double postcard. You could fold it over, put your address and stamp on one side, send it folded through the mail, and then the person gets it and can unfold it. There are trifold cards too. They're ended up a little too narrow to show in the book, but it's an example of the complex of buildings at the Hot Wells complex just south of downtown in the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah, Kenneth Johnson says it looks like it's snowing there. And I had the same impression at first, but then on closer examination, it doesn't look like it. Please tell us just a little bit about the Hot Wells itself for those who don't know the history, Louis.
There was a discovery along the San Antonio River of some mineral waters that were very hot. I think that was in the 1890s. And they found that by drilling wells in various parts, Harlandale, Terrell Wells, that the water would come up at temperatures of well over 100 degrees. In those days, there was no hot running water in the house. Indoor plumbing rarely had hot water. And these mineral waters had a medicinal value that could treat illnesses in a way that modern medicine could not yet do. So resort hotels sprung up here in San Antonio as well as at other places around the country, around the world, and became great resorts where people of means would come to spend a week or a month or two nursing their, nursing their ailments or what they thought ailed them, and just enjoying the good life in a fine resort facility like this one.
Indeed, and they were an impetus, therefore, to our tourist business long before the Alamo really was a major tourist attraction, it sounds like.
Well, certainly by the same time, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that leads us to our next postcard, which shows a tourist cottage. There we are.
Once the hotels were built for people originally who came by train. Then with the development of the automobile, you got motels, and there was a whole genre of postcard collecting of motels, tourist courts, and other tourist camps and things like that. This is one of my favorites. As you can probably tell from the sign, it's just southwest of Breckenridge Park at Elmira and Quincy. And you can tell that the rates are good because the owner says so. He says, "You'll like our place."
Right, and you can even see the telephone number, Crockett, something 9252 or something like that. Yeah.
Right of the car, it says the tourist office has a sign on the wall.
Right. Yeah, very good. Okay. Yeah, it was classic.
I might mention, this is a photo postcard. The postcards were not all color cards that were lithographs. Eastman Kodak developed in, I think it was 1903. They sold some inexpensive cameras that would come up with negatives that would print out on postcard stock. So people could print out a picture on a postcard stock and use them in this case for advertising, or in other cases for sending individual portraits or pictures home. And it sort of adds a new dimension to the the subject matter that postcards carry.
Yes, I remember also in the book you have some instances where there were gentlemen on the street who could, make you an instant photo postcard right there and develop it for you. Yeah, that was pretty neat.
While you wait.
Yeah, while you wait. Okay. So yes, well, let's move on, Bergen, to the next section, which is seeing the sights. And and Bill Mall has another question here. What are the ranges of dates when the cards were produced, Louis?
The finest cards came out just up through World War I, about 1900 to 1920. That's when there was just a postcard rage. There were postcard clubs. People collected cards. They mailed cards to each other. And so the great proliferation came during that time. After that, greeting cards came into use, and so the use of New Year's cards was taken over by Hallmark and others who actually enclosed them in an envelope. But there were so many individual companies in the first decades of this century that it added a diversity to postcards, which had, by the 1950s, had begun to disappear. And so the postcards in this book date almost all from the first half of the 20th century, which happens to be the time when San Antonio became the largest city in Texas and had a lot of things it wanted to show the rest of the world.
Yeah, indeed. The postcards, as you present them, show this surge of development over those decades. And so let's move.
Luxury, as you see here, we have some earlier postcards showing some pretty primitive conveyances, but this one here, the White Sightseeing Company outside the Alamo, is about as good as it gets in the 1920s.
Right, definitely a blue chip tourist company, right? And as you can see, obviously right then, although it was the shrine of Texas liberty, there was no controversy over whether or not you could drive your car right up to the Alamo. It was right there.
The building at the right, it doesn't show it in this postcard, but at one time, it was a Hertz rental car agency. And I've seen an image, not on a postcard, of that right next to the Alamo.
Okay, very good. Let's move to the next slide then, Bergen, please. All right, this is a very interesting angle on the Alamo, and I may assume executive privilege for a moment in noting that to the immediate left of the Alamo, you can see the very back wall of the former Gallagher mansion. Just so happens my name is Edward Gallagher Conroy, and that is where my father and all of his siblings were born, in the home of Thomas Leo Conroy and Elise Gallagher Conroy. So that really caught my attention.
What a view they had.
What a view they had, yeah. And the acequia was the property line right there behind them. But boy, what a wreck the Alamo was
Well,
back then.
this was Clara Driscoll. You know,
Right. Oh, yeah.
Clara Driscoll and Dean Zavala got at it, and Clara Driscoll
Right.
wanted the Alamo, the convento, the old building next door to the Alamo, torn down.
Right.
She didn't think it was Spanish. It turned out that it was Spanish. And she was successful in getting it torn down. So you look at this card today, on the one hand, and then you see the stories of the people who want to are planning to redevelop the Alamo and who are interested in preserving this grand old Spanish long barrack that is next to it. And you look at this and you wonder, well, what is there really left to preserve? All you see here are basically 2 walls left of the original barrack. And so it kind of tells you that it's not quite as historic a structure as you can be led to believe.
Right, and it looks like this had been tinted. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, well, hand tinted, hand colored, yes.
Hand-tinted, right.
Lithograph process, there are various levels of quality, but that does involve color. And
right. And it's interesting that they also mentioned the Menger Hotel, which was, you know, right there in the back, certainly a major part of San Antonio at that time, indeed.
And a lot of, you can't always trust the captions on postcards either. This says the Alamo and Fort. Well, there was no fort next to the Alamo, but it was used as a fortress during the battle, but that's not really, you know, what it was.
Right, exactly. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. And there we have an archetypal cowboy. Please tell us a little bit about this gentleman in this photo.
We've got a few slides in this, and San Antonio was a tourist center for South Texas. You went out onto the range, and this is a photo postcard that somebody sent home to Illinois or somewhere, showing a cowboy on his card. And in the book, we quote sometimes messages, snippets of messages from the back. And in this case, the writer wrote home something to the effect that this is, the Texas cowboy still exists. You will see them riding on their ranches.
Right. Well, indeed. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, so that concludes our section of seeing the sights. We're going to move on to living in San Antonio. With your help, Bergen, well, let's move to the next card, please. All right, there we have 2 sturdy grocers standing proudly in front of their store. Please tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, the Wasnigs just were one of dozens of people who had small grocery stores. This was on either East Houston or East Commerce Street. This would have been about 1910, while you still had small groceries. But you can take a card like this and look into, select any number of details that you like to look at window displays. You can see the bicycle in front. You can look inside the door.
Yeah, it's really a reminiscent of a whole another age of retailing when you went in and the grocer helped you get what you needed from the shelf, and nothing like a modern supermarket. That's
it's more like you'd expect to see in a small town in this era.
Right.
And this
Right.
San Antonio was not a small town, but here it is.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Let's move to the next one there, Bergen, please. This thatched house, or is it actually
this is the one living in San Antonio. There was a very curious situation in San Antonio. We had, of course, a very large population that had moved up from Mexico and brought with them Mexican traditions. The tourists went nuts over this. They never, in other parts of the United States, they'd never seen anything like that. And so there was a great variety of postcards published of some of the jacals and some of the primitive dwellings in San Antonio. And this is one of them, published by a British publisher, actually. This was at the lower left is the logo of Raphael Tuck and Sons in London, and they did some very high quality lithograph cards of scenes and cities all over the world, I guess. And this is how they pictured a home in San Antonio.
Yeah, and it has to be said, of course, that this is a representation, of course, of the poverty in which so many people who came from Mexico, many of whom were refugees at that time, and later, still the refugees flowed for many years after the Mexican Revolution of 1910, 1911, in very, very basic circumstances. And,
And this just happened to intrigue people from out of town. So you have homes like this, postcards of homes like this on one level, and then you skip everything in between until you get up to the homes. If Berkin can show the next slide.
Yes, the next one.
That people wanted, San Antonians wanted people outside to think that San Antonio lived in homes like this. Now there are very few postcards of elegant homes on the King William Street area because those were passé. This was one built in Tobin Hill about 1900, 1910. And so you have a lot of cards of grand homes like this in Tobin Hill and Monte Vista because these were the absolute latest and the absolute finest places that people could live in the city.
Yeah, the ones of Summit and on Kings Highway, they were extraordinarily grand homes. And yeah, indeed. All right, and that's a very beautiful rendering of it. Horns, horns, and more horns.
The Horn Palace was one of the great contributions of a guy named Billy Kyleman, who was kind of a notorious bad boy of San Antonio. He was pretty prominent in owning some houses in the red light district, and he also owned this bar called the Horn Palace, which had obviously an incredible number of heads. You had horn chairs, all sorts of things in it. You think today of just the buckhorn, but actually the buckhorn bought Kyleman's collection in the 1920s. So maybe half of what the buckhorn has today came from Kyleman's collection.
Yeah, it's almost surreal. I mean, it's like a by Salvador Dali or something. It's just really incredible.
You're standing at a bar and you look up and you think, well, it's one too many for me.
And it says, this Gail Spencer, it says to us, and Billy published the notorious Blue Book.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. You have no postcards, Gail. Maybe you do of the Blue Book habitués or the area. But this is as close as we get.
Very good. Well, at some time we'll have to have a further discussion about the Blue Book. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is another one that has a very curious quality. S.W. Slinkard and his wonderful tandem team at the Slinkard Ostrich Farm. There he is, master of his ostrich.
Was established down near in the Hot Wells area, down near the hotel, and his ostrich farm basically raised feathers. I think grew feathers for the famous popular hats of the time, ostrich plumed hats. But he also charged admission. And you could also, there's another card in the book of someone actually riding on the back of an ostrich.
Oh, that must have been fun. All right.
Only in San Antonio.
That's right. Very good. Well, from ostriches to rattlesnakes, let's look at the next one there. Preparing the weekly rattlesnake fry, reptile garden, Brackenridge Park.
Well, who can forget the reptile garden by the Whitty Museum? This was actually started by the Whitty as a way to build admissions and help survive the Depression. But we have a series, a page or two of pictures of rattlesnake fry in Brackenridge Park, in which they end up holding a plate out to sell to a very happy customer. But this is a hand-tinted card. This is one that was, you can tell, was hand-colored. And this was
right. I'm old enough to remember that mysterious reptile garden. I would always go there in the summer when I was taking classes at the Whitty, just because it was so bizarre. But I never got in on a rattlesnake fry. I feel a little bit left out.
Well, if you were there during World War II, you would have.
Right. I think it was something from another era. Yeah.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah, they were not only serving them, they were gleefully serving them. You know, it looked
Yeah,
like it was
and
a
there's one
delicacy.
guy at the Whitty who was famous for actually going out on rattlesnake hunts. And he went from one ranch to another outside gathering rattlesnakes to bring in and fry.
All kinds of ways to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on, Bergen, to the next section here, please. This is churches, schools, and colleges. Here we have San Antonio's newest Second Baptist Church for, as it says, colored people. Tell us a little bit. It's really quite a remarkable structure. Tell us.
I wish we had more cards of the African American community in San Antonio, but I think this is a card that shows how in this one instance there is a landmark that was built by the African American community that
Yes.
really some of the other grand churches in San Antonio, and there was no hesitation in getting the word of this church out to the people. The church building itself no longer exists. The Second Baptist Church is, however, still a very large and viable institution.
Yes, it was a significant capital investment and a very beautiful church in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea who the architect might have been?
Well, I could look it up. I don't know the name just offhand. This church stood somewhere, I think just east of the Alamo Dome, where the Alamo Dome is now.
Very good. Thank you. So let's move on to a school. Here we have the one-room schoolhouse of the Wetmore School.
Yeah, I think this was another photo postcard, and I suspect it was a promotion of the San Antonio Light that gets the newspaper that gets its name prominently displayed on the back of the car. My guess is they sent a light photographer out, as long as they could have their name in it, they would give copies of the card to all the students who were in the picture and their teacher, who was I think it is Bertha Ackerman, but they were all. They all fit in this one-room school in Wetmore, which is now somewhere in the midst of shopping centers and strip malls north of the airport.
Wetmore Road, exactly.
That's it.
Yeah, well, Bertha looks like she's a very proud teacher of her class, and I'm impressed by the fact that they could get all these kids to line up and take the photo and look halfway amiable. It looks like a fairly happy little school.
Yeah, she looks like the kind of person who'd be up to the job.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Those were lucky kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a very different school in the next photograph. We have the Lakeside Classical Institute, a high-grade school with military training for manly boys from good homes. Tell us a little bit about this one.
There were a lot of military schools in San Antonio in the early 20th century. Peacock Military Academy on Woodlawn Lake was one of them. This was actually started by a professor who went a few blocks away to start his own military academy, which he called, although you see all the boys there in uniform, he called it the Classical Institute. He took over a building that had been previously owned and operated as the Thomas School, which moved into the King William area, and which it was this building, the Thomas School, that Katherine N. Porter attended, the Thomas School for Girls, when it was at this location.
Well, I love Ship of Fools, but not everybody may remember who Katherine Porter was. So tell us a little bit about her and her connection with San Antonio.
Well, she was a novelist who lived, I think, in Buda, up north of here, and was sent to boarding school here in San Antonio, which I think she thoroughly detested, but she nevertheless soldiered through.
Very good. Thank you. That's a wonderful anecdote. All right. Well, let's move on to Military City, USA. And there we have testing a Wright machine at Fort Sam Houston. I understand this Wright machine came as a kit and was assembled right there on the parade grounds. Is that correct?
Well, some were. I think the first one was. I don't think this is not necessarily the first one, but
Okay.
one of the reasons that Fort Sam Houston was the largest military post in the United States in the first decade or two of the century is because we were so close to Mexico.
Right.
When the Mexican Revolution started in 1910. The government made a pretty quick decision that we better be prepared in case it spills over into the United States. And
Right.
so there was a maneuver camp set up at Fort Sam Houston in 1911 that brought something like 10,000 soldiers from all over the country to San Antonio.
Wow.
They tried out, actually, in a sense, it was a proving ground for World War I. They tried out airplanes. They tried out wireless communications with the Signal Corps, the new machine guns. We have postcards of all those things showing. And this is just a shot of the airfield that was at Fort Sam before Fort Sam got too small and they moved to Kelly.
Yeah, and just look.
The only time that Douglas MacArthur was ever stationed in San Antonio, although he grew up here, but because his father was head of Fort Sam, but the only time MacArthur was actually stationed in San Antonio was with the National Guard at this maneuver camp. And while he was in his tent, one of these Wright machines came in for a crash landing, and it stopped just short of MacArthur's tent. And some people have wondered how the history of the world would have changed if that plane had not stopped short.
Wow, that's a great anecdote. And let's just look a little at greater detail in the photo. It looks like there is a bunch of horses or horsemen in the middle. Is that correct?
I think that's probably it, either that or just simply marching soldiers.
Right, hard to make out, yeah.
Miles and miles of tents.
Yes, they just stretch on to the infinity. Yeah, absolutely, to the vanishing point.
On the site of what became Camp Travis, which is just east of New Braunfels in Fort Sam right now. It's been totally
very good. All right, let's move on to be prepared, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, this is not a pretty sight, but it is an execution. So tell us about this.
Well, in the book, able to stray a little bit into the Mexican Revolution because the Pancho Villa came from Mexico into Mexico, and he burned Columbus, New Mexico, and got the United States into the Pershing expedition. Pershing was sent to catch Pancho Villa, which he didn't do, but the base of operations was Fort Sam Houston. So to give a sense of what made the border such a dangerous place, we ran a series of 3 of these postcards called the Triple Execution. There was a postcard photographer in El Paso named Walter Horn, who did some excellent cards. In fact, some of his work, photo cards, can really be defined as art in many cases. And one of his some of his cards were exhibited at the International Museum of Photography in New York City several years ago. Mm-hmm. The triple execution was these three men had been accused of stealing government supplies in Juarez. They were lined up against the wall of a train station and shot one by one. And as one fell and the next one was put up, the postcard of the second one being shot shows the body of the first one on the ground, and then the third, same thing happened with the third one. You had 2 bodies on the ground, and it became one of the most popular postcard sets of this era.
Yeah, it's very grim, but it shows how the postcards conveyed news.
Well, it does, and it shows how the Mexican government tried to terrorize the civilian populace by showing them what could happen to them if they revolted, and that didn't do a bit of good.
Very interesting, yeah. And as we can see down the bottom, triple execution in Mexico. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on to a much different and fascinating photograph. As we can see, there is Japanese calligraphy down at the bottom in kanji, and Katie Stinson from San Antonio, Stinson Field, smiling at us from her biplane. What an extraordinary photograph. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, if anybody out there knows Japanese, I'd be very happy to hear a translation of this.
Yeah.
But in the years before World War I, Katherine Stinson, as a female aviatrix, was very well known. She went on a tour of Japan. And this is actually a Japanese postcard printed in Japan of Katherine Stinson at her plane somewhere in Japan. We've got the military series of this this book section. This book goes into a lot of detail, and we show a lot of we show examples of each of the posts, and including Stinson Field, which this one appears with. But that's Katherine Stinson of the Stinson family that had a flying school at Stinson Field.
Yeah, she looks like a very charming young exhibition pilot, and I hear that she was, incredibly skilled as, grew up obviously flying planes, in her backyard.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
So there is a question from earlier from John Anderson saying, and perhaps this was in relationship to the story about the plane nearly hitting MacArthur. It says, was the pilot possibly Benny Foulet? I don't know.
No, it was not. I don't know who it was. Foulet or Foulois, whatever. Fouloy. Fouloy was actually stationed at Fort Sam Houston. He is the one who built the airplane from a kit. It was shipped down from Washington. He got the brothers, told him how to assemble it. He assembled it and flew it. And that was the first, people say it was the first military flight in Texas, the first military flight at Fort Sam Houston. That's been misinterpreted to be the first military flight ever. It was not. That was up in New Jersey, but it was the first military flight in Texas, and that was a little bit before the maneuver cap photo. All
right. Well, let's talk a little bit more, and everyone remember. Oh, Gail has a comment. Says, after crashing, Foulois invented the seat belt.
Yeah, it's just kind of an example of how you have to have something bad happen before you anticipate what you need.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. So and more questions are certainly welcome. I can see them, they pop up on the chat feature as you write them. So this is time for general Q&A. If you have anything you'd like to ask as we begin to conclude, because we've been through the book, but I have to say that we've really only scratched the surface of the book. And one of the things that I love about the book is how there are great juxtapositions. For example, there's a wonderful juxtaposition of the old San Antonio City Hall that has the cupola on top, and then the later edition, the City Hall of Brian Callahan, and then the City Hall of Walter McAllister. So could you talk a little bit about that, how you have attempted to show contrasts and comparisons?
Well, when things are documented over a period of 40 or 50 years, you see a lot of changes. And so we try to reflect those in the book. And in the case of City Hall, you can look at the turrets in the original City Hall, and then look at the new City Hall and see, that's where the turrets were. If you hear that this City Hall was really remodeled, but it's not until you can see the two pictures next to each other that you can really see what is left from the past.
Do you have any idea of why they actually decided to change the architecture of City Hall? I mean, I think the original one was much more charming.
It was very charming. It was very 1890s, and San Antonio by that time had grown 2 or 3 times the size, and they needed a new floor of offices. Bureaucracy was slowly catching up with the rest of the city, so they got more space by doing that. And they used the Spanish colonial revival style in the 1920s, because that's the style that was most popular then. And it's a good thing it was, because we got many beautiful buildings as a result.
Yeah, and Bill Maul just gave us another question, which I'll get to in a second. But You know, I did a study of the mysterious Texas airships that passed over various cities in the 1890s to 1900. And there's actually a story in the San Antonio Express about an airship that was seen flying over City Hall. And in fact, there was a message that had come from by telegraph from a boy up at San Pedro Springs Park who saw it. And so a bunch of people went up to the top of City Hall and witnessed it, they said, flying straight over City Hall with a searchlight beaming down upon them in the early 1900s. How odd.
Are any of them taken up into it?
No, unfortunately, or if they did, they didn't live to tell about it. So Bill Mall has asked if you have added any new postcards to your collection, and what might they be, if so?
Well, have been adding a few. One of the most intriguing ones was a German card about a German. It was advertising a German fundraising fiesta in San Antonio in 1918 to benefit the soldiers of the fatherland. And
wow.
It shows how the local German community was really tied in to what was going on in Germany. This was 6 months before the U.S. entered the war against Germany.
Wow.
And it is just a fascinating, I think, just a fascinating example of that.
Thank you. That's amazing. The Bund, of course, was very active back then.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Kenneth Johnson about the Mattress Factory on page 71. He asks, where was it?
Oh, goodness. That would be, what is it, the Sanitary Mattress Company by some chance? Yeah. I don't, without looking at the card, I can't tell you, but if I got a contact information, I could find out. Actually, let me look it up real quickly. Maybe
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You know, and that section there, pages 70, 71, is also notable for its wonderful photo of the old city market building, which of course was destroyed. It's from 1899, and it shows the gardens out at front. You know, the destruction of the market was one of the things that animated, you know, Emily Edwards and others to form the Conservation Society, as you have told the story so well. Yeah. And then there's also a wonderful, you know, depiction of the Mistletoe Melody Maids who sang on WOAI radio.
Yeah. Haven't got a quick answer on the location, but it can be.
I'm sure you'll find out eventually, Louis. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that we should talk about a little bit is that there appear to be very few representations of African American life, as you've said, and there were a number of representations of Mexican and Mexican American life at that time. Mm-hmm. But they tended to be somewhat romanticized. Do you have anything to comment on about that?
Well, that would be in part because San Antonio was emphasizing its Spanish heritage through the missions.
Right.
We had Spanish colonial architecture was very popular at that time, right. And so it seemed that the romantic idea of Spaniards with guitars singing serenades would make the city sound very appealing, and so yes. There were many postcards of that. If they happened to be in the garden of the Spanish governor's palace, so much the better. And
yes,
so
indeed.
They were staged there also.
Right, or along the river in the Riverwalk.
Right, right,
yeah.
Right.
Tell us about the depictions of the river and the Riverwalk. You're really kind of the expert on that.
Well,
go ahead.
Riverwalk, we have a lot of the River Park, which the predecessor of the Riverwalk, which was like in the early, in the teens. The Riverwalk itself came in the 1940s. Right. I've got a couple of those just to kind of show how the modern Riverwalk evolved, but that's getting a little bit out of the time frame of this
Right.
book. So.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. To you, what are some of your favorite cards? So I know you have so many. It's hard, if like you have many children, it's hard to say which are your favorites.
Well,
But
that is a dangerous subject. One of them is I mentioned how postcards, photographic postcards, can rise to the level of fine art. The artist Mary Bonner, who was noted for a number of her works on native subjects, did a series of postcards in the 1920s, and we use one of them as the frontispiece for the book. It was a card showing the Chili Queens. Let me get the actual title here from the book. It's called Mexican Vendors San Fernando Plaza, but it shows ghosts of the Chili Queens hovering at the left, and then some modern people at the right sitting in the same location. And I think that is one of the more unexpected examples of fine art postcards in San Antonio.
that's very interesting. Yeah, I'm a big admirer of Mary Bonner's work, and I had no idea that she was in that medium as well.
She did some of the missions at the Alamo, San Fernando, the Governor's Palace.
Yes. Okay. Bergen says, Bill Fisher wants to ask an audio question. Can I let him in?
I'm in for it now.
Is Lewis's son. By all means.
What do you got? What do you got? Coming through. Maybe it's been censored.
No, I hear the dog barking. But...
Yeah, the dog barking in the back. Okay. Oh, it looks like it's muted. Maybe Bill needs, okay. Bill, we're waiting for you. Looking forward to hearing from you. Or maybe we will have to have it by chat here. Let's see. All right. Well, while we're waiting, I have another question from Kenneth Johnson. He says on page 120, the International Fair exposition was held at current Riverside Park. Currently, Roosevelt Park is a few miles north where the railroad overpass is. Do you have anything to say about that, Lewis?
Yeah, that's down where Teddy Roosevelt organized his Rough Riders.
Right.
It was the International Fair started in the 1880s as a joint venture between San Antonio and Mexico to kind of promote the goods of Mexico and to promote the San Antonio good international relations. There were many. We've got a number of cards of the fair in the book. It lasted until 1910, and that was when the Mexican Revolution got underway, and Mexico had to pull out to try to save the park, the location of the park, and all the facilities there, the various rides and things. The city opened what they called Exposition Park, but that didn't last more than just a couple of years.
Okay. All right. Well, somehow in the most recent flurry of activity trying to get Bill Fisher in, I have lost access to being able to see chat, and all I can see is you right now, Lewis. So perhaps no need to be sorry. Maybe that's a sign, though, from the gods of technology that this might be a good time in which to wrap this up. So I want to thank you, Lewis, for a really wonderful conversation and a little journey through the pages of your book. I really enjoyed it. And I want to thank everybody who sent in such great questions and comments. And so I've got a little script here from Bergen, and I just want to say especially thank you to everybody who's participating in the whole Maverick Book Club experience, which is a monthly series from Trinity University Press. And the next one will be on Wednesday, August 12th at 7 p.m. Central Time, featuring a very frank conversation on writing Black history in San Antonio. And it will feature Claudia Guerra, Carrie Clack, Mario Salas, and Everett Fly. And it'll be featuring the book 300 Years in San Antonio and Bexar County. So you can register now for this free event via a link in chat or on tupress.org. And in a confirmation email, you will receive a link and a promo code to buy the book at the special Maverick Book Club price. And this book, your book, Lewis, can also be bought at that special discount as well. So happy reading, everybody. And by the way, if you're not familiar with all the other titles that are in the Maverick collection, they're there on the Trinity University Press website. I encourage you to look at them, and of course at the other extraordinary titles that Trinity University Press has done. Hats off to Tom and Bergen and the whole team there for getting to know San Antonio intimately and publishing so many wonderful books that reflect our people, our culture, and our times. So thanks, Louis. Adios.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Bergen.
Yeah, hasta la vista.
Right.
Okay. We'll see you.
Okay.
Good night.
Night.